Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here today for Quick Tip Thursday. Today we're going to be talking about InFocus versus detail. That's one of the most common questions we get here at Topaz because they both deal with the idea of sharpening. So I hope that I'm able to distinguish the two programs for you and where they fit into your workflow. Our tip number one, InFocus. InFocus is going to be used, or its intended use is for capture sharpening and slight deblurring, but today we're going to be focusing on the capture sharpening part. Capture sharpening is something that's used to kind of account for the slight blurring that will happen within digital cameras or scanners. It's just a natural thing that happens, and yes, as you go up in quality in your camera, you'll see less of that blur, but you'll still see a little bit of blur. So capture sharpening is really there to address that blurring within however you've taken your image or however you've created your image. Then Topaz Detail. Detail is there for your creative and output sharpening. Creative sharpening is something that's very subjective to the artist, so you can apply it selectively to certain areas of your image. You can, in Topaz Detail, you can apply some beautiful medium and large detail enhancements, and that's really where that creative sharpening comes in. We'll talk about that. And then output sharpening is based upon what your output is going to be, whether you're creating an image for the web or you're posting it on Facebook or you're printing it out on a really large scale format. That's where that output sharpening comes in. But something really nice about Topaz Detail as well is you can add some finishing touches to your tone, to your overall image brightness and contrast, and we'll look at that today as well. Tip number 3 is definitely beware of over sharpening. Whenever you're working with all 3 types of sharpening, you just want to be really subtle, especially with the capture sharpening at first. You don't want to over sharpen during that stage because that will definitely start to look over sharpened whenever you move on to the creative or definitely the output sharpening stage of your workflow. And then save your image before output sharpening. That is something I suggest to everybody because output sharpening is there to, you do that as your last step to your workflow, and it's going to be different for each and every output. So let's say you're submitting online to a photo show or some photo contest. That output sharpening is going to be different than if you printed an 11 by 14 print on your printer. So you don't want to go through the whole workflow again for each and every time you want to produce an image. So you want to save it in the layers format, hopefully, before the output sharpening, or at least save it before the output sharpening so you can do that as your last step. So let's jump on into the programs real quick, and we'll go over a short workflow where I go through all of these processes. So first we're going to talk about, well, this is the image we're going to walk through. Here's the original image. It's a nice image to start off with, and it looks pretty sharp actually, especially from the distance that the image was taken. The focus was on the glacier between the mountains, so if we go into that area, I'm going to go to 100%, you start to see that it is actually a little bit out of focus. It's just a little bit blurry. It's not extremely blurry by any means, but it is a little bit soft when you go to that 100% viewing. When you work with InFocus first, that's what we're going to do first, you'll be able to take that blur out of, that natural blur out of your image. It's almost like getting a better lens. It's pretty fun because your image all of a sudden becomes sharp at this 100% view. So again, let me show you that. I've just turned on my InFocus layer. I'm going to take it off now. Here's before. Keep an eye on this tree line right here, especially this tree right here. It's really obvious. I'm turning back in focus. It just becomes clearer. Now it's not obviously sharpened at 100%. It just looks like it's really in focus. I want to show you at 200% really what was going on there. Let me go back down. Now obviously this isn't going to be super sharp because we are at 200%, but here's before with just the background layer, the original image, and then in focus. You can tell it definitely pops up that focus. Then I just jumped on into adjust just to pop up my photo a little bit. And then in Topaz Detail, I was able to, we can stay at this stage, I was able to not only do my creative sharpening, but also my output sharpening in one program. So that's a benefit to Topaz Detail as well. So let's look at that one more time. Here's before, and here's after. That's quite a bit of sharpening, but it's more of the creative detail that's coming out. And then I'll show you that stage between the creative versus the detail. So let me open up here, get rid of this background copy. Okay, here we have our background layer. I'm just going to make a quick background copy. And I'm going to go into Topaz InFocus. Unless you have a very noisy, high ISO, lots of color noise in your image, we always suggest you go into Topaz InFocus first. It's best used on a raw image format, the very first thing that you do. However, as we've discovered in the past couple days, with really, really high ISO, really noisy images, it tends to focus your noise, your color noise, quite a bit, and makes it that much more difficult to remove that noise afterwards. So if you have a ton of noise in your dark areas and it was a super high ISO, you'll want to go into denoise first, but otherwise your capture sharpening should be done first to your image. So I'm just going to press reset all and get out of here. My favorite way to do capture sharpening is just by going to the unknown estimate blur. This is just, it's not really out of focus. It's not an out of focus image. It's in focus. It's just that natural blur that's happening with a digital image. It's not a motion blur. It's really not a generic type of blur. I don't really, this is great for micro contrast type of sharpening a little bit, but I prefer this unknown estimate. So I'm just going to click on there. And with an image that doesn't have much blur like this image, it's just soft, the blur radius is not going to be very high. The way that you set the blur radius is by determining how many pixels the blur is. Now when we have a raw image like this, it might be a little bit higher blur radius than if we'd resized it to a smaller image, but it's really not much altogether because it is quite a in-focus image already. So I'm going to take my blur radius up to about 4 and see what happens. And then the edge softness is just to control any sort of overshooting that might happen to start showing some artifacts. I always say that 0.2 is a good place to put your edge softness to start off with because it will soften up any of those edges that like take your or start to create artifacts. Then we also have the suppress artifacts button. An important thing to know about InFocus is that you have to set these two, the blur radius and edge softness, when you're in your unknown estimate before you press your estimate blur button. When you have it set, you just press your estimate blur. Keep an eye down here. Okay, and it immediately just crisps everything up. Here's before, and here's after. Again, let me go into 200% to show you. However, it doesn't look great at this, but at least you can see the difference. Here's before and after. Now you can play around with your blur radius a little bit more to see if you want to sharpen that up a tiny bit more. We're looking at this at 100% again. Or if you want to, take that down and take it a little bit less sharp, you can do that. I'm pretty happy with this, and I want to show you Topaz Detail as well, and we're already running out of time, so I'm going to say okay. Again, this was my capture sharpening stage. Now the next part of my workflow would be to deal with my exposure, my saturation, all of my leveling, my normal workflow before my last stage of sharpening. Now some people would do some creative sharpening within this workflow, and that's fine if you want to do that selectively within, but we're going to do that at the end. I'm just going to pop this into Topaz Adjust 5, and I'm just going to hit Photo Pop, one of my favorite settings, just to work on all levels. Here's before, here's after, There is some detail that goes, some creative detail that goes into this particular preset. So I'm going to go into my global adjustments, into my details tab, and I'm just going to set it back to its default by pressing this local reset button and clicking process details independently. Now my details haven't been touched. It's just been my exposure, my color, and that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to press OK. I'm pretty happy there. We're going to go into Topaz Detail now and go to the last stage of the process. I'm going to make a copy of my adjust layer, and I'm going to go to Detail. Again, Detail is for creative sharpening and output sharpening, but the first thing I like to work with in Detail is my creative sharpening. What's happening here, the pre-processing, Topaz Detail is breaking your image into 6 different sizes of detail. You have small detail, small boost, medium detail, medium boost, large detail, large boost. I'm going to press Reset All. And the small detail and small boost I like to use just for my output sharpening at this point. So what I'm going to work with first in this particular image is my medium detail and my large detail for my creative looks. Now I can go in just a little bit, which I do want to do. We'll look around this area. And I'm just going to take my medium detail up. The medium detail is going to take the medium-sized attributes in your image and just enhance those a little bit. The medium boost is going to take that up just a notch. So let me show you this before and after. Here's before and after. It's really obvious right here in the glacier. Here's before and after. So that's where the creative part starts coming in. It's definitely subjective in whether or not you want to enhance these type of characteristics. The large detail is great for clouds, and it's great for large areas of contrast in your image. I'm going to take my large boost up a little, and that's going to go very crazy. But here's before, and here's after. Again, this is subjective. This is a little strong for me, but I want to make sure that you see it on your screen. Here's before, and here's after. Now, at this point, if I was happy with my creative sharpening, I would move down to my tone and play around with that. This is really what Detail can offer as well. A little bit of finishing touches to your image at the end of your workflow. Let me go to Fit. Here we go. So you can change your brightness, your contrast. You can also take some of your tones and make them brighter or darker. So you can just play around with that a little bit. I'm going to go take my cyan red towards the red side, which will make my cyan darker and my reds lighter. I'm going to take my magenta green to the left side, which will make my magenta lighter. And I'll do the same here. There we go. So here's before, here's after. We've done a lot here in Topaz Detail. You can also protect your shadows and protect your highlights here. We do have a little deblurring here, but that's just a little bit more sharpening in your image if you want it. I prefer the deblur in InFocus if you are working with a slightly blurry image. This is really just a couple pixel type of deblur. You also have your color if you want to bump up your saturation for the last moment, your saturation boost, which takes the weaker colors in your image and takes that up. And then you can change your hue as well. At this point, if I was happy with everything, my creative sharpening, I would actually get out of Topaz Detail and save my image. So I'm not working on any output sharpening at this point. But just to show you, since we're already in here, let me just go 1:1, which is what you want to look at when you're doing output sharpening, unless you're working with a smaller image. And then it looks pretty soft here still around my textures and everything. Here's before, here's after. I've lost a bit of the small detail because I've enhanced my medium and my large detail. It looks a little bit softer. So as I take my small detail up, just keep a look at in that area. And it just brings that back to life. Again, let me take that down. Keep your eye out around this area. Here's 0, and I'm going to 0.3-ish. Just takes that up. It's the last sharpening that I like to do within my workflow is that small detail. If you want to take that small boost up, you can. You need to watch out though because your small detail will enhance the smallest areas within your image, and which is almost 1 to 2 pixels, and it will start to create an almost noise-like texture within smooth parts, such as in skies. So you might want to mask that small amount of output detail out. And again, keep in mind how you are going to be viewing this image, or how your viewers, your audience is going to be viewing this image. If they're going to be stepping back, nobody really looks at an image at 100% like we're at. So if you're going to be hanging in a gallery or on the wall, maybe take it down to 70 or 50% of your image, which is what the distance would be if they're actually taking a look at it. And if it looks too sharp at this particular percent, then you work with it at this percent. Or after you've resized to your web sized images or your Facebook images that you're going to be working with, you'll then take it in for your output sharpening, and you'll work with it at that size as opposed to a really large size, so you can really have an accurate last step in your workflow. So that, I hope, explains the difference between InFocus and detail. I will answer a few questions. Let's see here. Valerie asked, will this process work good with people? I took some recent wedding pictures and they have a lot of noise, so after I apply denoise they look a little blurred, especially in the eye area. All right, Valerie, good question. Yes, it should work great on people. Now, something to consider when you're working with your creative sharpening, you may not want to put any creative sharpening on people's faces. That tends to start to make them look a little harsh, and that's never a good thing, especially when you're in wedding photographs. But to do your capture sharpening, InFocus would work great to take out that blur. And if it's not very noisy to start off with, if it's just a very small amount of noise, then you can take it into InFocus first. If it's a very large amount of noise that is very obvious, then yes, take it into your noise reduction program first. And then going through this process and making sure that your output sharpening is at the very end so you don't over sharpen, this will definitely work on people images as well. Mindy says, you said to start with a raw image. Does that mean unprocessed first in ACR? Mindy, yes, it's best to work with your capture sharpening with a raw image or a TIFF image. That's really going to be the best. The only reason is it's uncompressed. You have more information, but let me show you a couple examples of some JPEGs. So this is just InFocus example. This was a JPEG image. I do have a levels layer on top of it, but here's before Topaz InFocus. It's very subtle, but it does make a difference if you're trying to look at things in a large output. And here's after. You can really tell up here in the ice crystals and down here in this rose petal. Here's before and after. So you can use it with other images other than raw images, and it will still be an effective way to get that really beautiful de-blurring of that just really subtle softness that happens naturally with digital images. So you can kind of just erase that, take that away with your InFocus. And then detail would be the next step of, if you wanted to really have these ice crystals stand out, you would play with your medium detail and go from there. But the best way is to start off in a raw format. You can process it through your ACR, Adobe Camera Raw, and then before you do anything else, take it into InFocus. Okay, Gary says, I noticed you can go smaller than 100%, but I cannot or have not been able to in my copy of InFocus. With InFocus, you actually can't go more than 100%. I'm just going to take this particular, even though this is our detailed image, just to show you. Even on mine, I can't go less than 100% on InFocus. In detail I can, and in most of our other programs, but I believe it's this program, denoise, possibly djpeg as well, not going to allow you to go less than 100% because you can't see what the product is actually doing to your image unless you're probably over sharpening it at that point. So you want to be looking at this at 100%. Same thing with denoise. You want to be looking at the image at 100% because when you're reducing noise out of your image and you're looking at it at 25%, most likely you're going to be softening up your image much softer than you wanted it to be and not being able to add that detail back in. So the program does not allow anybody to go less than 100%. All right, thanks again, and we'll be seeing you soon. Bye-bye.